Jake Morrison felt the ship shake around him as another energy blast hit the hull. The Terra Nova was taking heavy damage from the 3 Zephyrian warships that had appeared out of nowhere near the Helios sector. Red warning lights flashed across the bridge while alarms screamed through the corridors. "Captain, shields are down to 15%, called out Lieutenant Kate Phillips from her station. Her voice stayed calm, but Jake could hear the fear underneath. They all knew what happened. To human ships caught by the Zephyrian Empire. Jake gripped his command chair as another blast rocked the ship. "Return fire with everything we have," he ordered. The Terra Nova was just an exploration vessel, not built for combat against military ships. But they had to try. The ship's weapons fired back at the alien vessels, but the shots barely scratched their shields. The Zephyrians had better technology and more firepower. Jake watched on the main screen as his crew's best efforts seemed useless against the enemy ships. "Hull breach on Deck 3, reported Chief Engineer Danny Brooks over the comm system. "I'm sealing it off, but we're losing atmosphere fast." Jake made a hard choice. All hands to escape pods. Abandon ship. "Sir, what about you?" Kate asked, not moving from her station. "Someone has to keep the ship stable while you all get out." "Go, that's an order." Kate looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew better. She ran toward the escape pod bays with the rest of the bridge crew. Jake stayed at his post, trying to keep the Terra Nova flying long enough for his people to escape. One by one, he watched the escape pods launch on his screen. Each pod that got away safely gave him hope that at least some of his crew would survive. The Zephyrians usually ignored escape pods, since they only wanted the ship and any valuable cargo. The last pod launched just as another massive blast hit the ship. This time the Terra Nova couldn't take it. Jake felt the deck tilting under his feet as the ship started to break apart. He ran toward the final escape pod, but another explosion threw him against the wall. Pain shot through his left arm, and he tasted blood in his mouth. By the time he reached the escape pod bay, half the corridor was open to space. His pod was still there, but the launch controls were damaged. Jake worked frantically to get them, working again while the ship fell apart around him. Just as the pod systems came online, a section of the ceiling collapsed and knocked him unconscious. Jake woke up in a small metal room with no windows. His head hurt, and his left arm was in some kind of cast. The walls were smooth and silver, with no visible door or opening. A soft blue light came from the ceiling, but he couldn't see where it came from. He tried to remember what happened, but everything after the escape pod was blank. The Terra Nova was gone. That much was certain. His crew was probably dead or captured. 2. Jake pushed down the grief and anger. He needed to stay focused if he wanted to survive. A section of the wall suddenly became transparent, revealing a tall alien figure on the other side. The being had gray skin, 4 arms, and large black eyes that seemed to look right through him. This was his first time seeing a Zephyrian up close. The alien spoke in perfect English, which surprised Jake. "I am Commander Vex Corleth, Warden of Kithara Prime Maximum Security Facility. You are now prisoner number 7349. What happened to my crew?" Jake asked, standing up slowly. "The escape pods were destroyed as required by Imperial Law 4672. Corleth replied without emotion. "You survived only because your pod was damaged and drifted into our cargo bay. The Empire has use for a living human specimen." Jake felt his heart sink. His entire crew was dead because he hadn't been fast enough. The weight of command and failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. "You will remain here until you die," Corleth continued. "This facility holds the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy. No one has ever escaped from Kithara Prime. The Codex of Absolute Order ensures perfect security. "What's this codex?" Jake asked, trying to learn anything that might help him later. "The complete set of laws that govern all Zephyrian society. 10,000 laws that cover every possible situation. Perfect order, perfect justice, perfect control." Corlith seemed proud as he spoke about it. What if someone finds a problem with one of these laws? Corlith's black eyes narrowed. There are no problems with the Codex. It was written by the greatest legal minds in our history 500 years ago. It has never needed to be changed because it is perfect. The alien turned and walked away, leaving Jake alone in his cell. The wall became solid silver again, cutting off his view of the corridor outside. Jake sat back down on the small bench. That served as his bed and started thinking 10,000 laws that had never been changed in 500 years. A system that claimed to be perfect. Jake had spent enough time in the military to know that no system was truly perfect. There were always flaws, always weaknesses. He just had to find them. The Zephyrians thought they had captured just another human prisoner. They had no idea that Jake Morrison was about to become their biggest problem. Jake Morrison felt the ship shake around him as another energy blast hit the hull. The Terra Nova was taking heavy damage from the 3 Zephyrian warships that had appeared out of nowhere near the Helios sector. Red warning lights flashed across the bridge while alarms screamed through the corridors. "Captain, shields are down to 15%, called out Lieutenant Kate Phillips from her station. Her voice stayed calm, but Jake could hear the fear underneath. They all knew what happened. To human ships caught by the Zephyrian Empire. Jake gripped his command chair as another blast rocked the ship. "Return fire with everything we have," he ordered. The Terra Nova was just an exploration vessel, not built for combat against military ships. But they had to try. The ship's weapons fired back at the alien vessels, but the shots barely scratched their shields. The Zephyrians had better technology and more firepower. Jake watched on the main screen as his crew's best efforts seemed useless against the enemy ships. "Hull breach on Deck 3, reported Chief Engineer Danny Brooks over the comm system. "I'm sealing it off, but we're losing atmosphere fast." Jake made a hard choice. All hands to escape pods. Abandon ship. "Sir, what about you?" Kate asked, not moving from her station. "Someone has to keep the ship stable while you all get out." "Go, that's an order." Kate looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew better. She ran toward the escape pod bays with the rest of the bridge crew. Jake stayed at his post, trying to keep the Terra Nova flying long enough for his people to escape. One by one, he watched the escape pods launch on his screen. Each pod that got away safely gave him hope that at least some of his crew would survive. The Zephyrians usually ignored escape pods, since they only wanted the ship and any valuable cargo. The last pod launched just as another massive blast hit the ship. This time the Terra Nova couldn't take it. Jake felt the deck tilting under his feet as the ship started to break apart. He ran toward the final escape pod, but another explosion threw him against the wall. Pain shot through his left arm, and he tasted blood in his mouth. By the time he reached the escape pod bay, half the corridor was open to space. His pod was still there, but the launch controls were damaged. Jake worked frantically to get them, working again while the ship fell apart around him. Just as the pod systems came online, a section of the ceiling collapsed and knocked him unconscious. Jake woke up in a small metal room with no windows. His head hurt, and his left arm was in some kind of cast. The walls were smooth and silver, with no visible door or opening. A soft blue light came from the ceiling, but he couldn't see where it came from. He tried to remember what happened, but everything after the escape pod was blank. The Terra Nova was gone. That much was certain. His crew was probably dead or captured. 2. Jake pushed down the grief and anger. He needed to stay focused if he wanted to survive. A section of the wall suddenly became transparent, revealing a tall alien figure on the other side. The being had gray skin, 4 arms, and large black eyes that seemed to look right through him. This was his first time seeing a Zephyrian up close. The alien spoke in perfect English, which surprised Jake. "I am Commander Vex Corlith, Warden of Kithara Prime Maximum Security Facility. You are now prisoner number 7349. What happened to my crew?" Jake asked, standing up slowly. "The escape pods were destroyed as required by Imperial Law 4672. Corlith replied without emotion. "You survived only because your pod was damaged and drifted into our cargo bay. The Empire has use for a living human specimen." Jake felt his heart sink. His entire crew was dead because he hadn't been fast enough. The weight of command and failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. "You will remain here until you die," Corlith continued. "This facility holds the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy. No one has ever escaped from Kithara Prime. The Codex of Absolute Order ensures perfect security." "What's this Codex?" Jake asked, trying to learn anything that might help him later. "The complete set of laws that govern all Zephyrian society. 10,000 laws that cover every possible situation. Perfect order, perfect justice, perfect control." Corlith seemed proud as he spoke about it. "What if someone finds a problem with one of these laws?" Corlith's black eyes narrowed. "There are no problems with the Codex. It was written by the greatest legal minds in our history 500 years ago. It has never needed to be changed because it is perfect." The alien turned and walked away, leaving Jake alone in his cell. The wall became solid silver again, cutting off his view of the corridor outside. Jake sat back down on the small bench. That served as his bed and started thinking. 10,000 laws that had never been changed in 500 years. A system that claimed to be perfect. Jake had spent enough time in the military to know that no system was truly perfect. There were always flaws, always weaknesses. He just had to find them. The Zephyrians thought they had captured just another human prisoner. They had no idea that Jake Morrison was about to become their biggest problem. Jake waited until the morning shift change to put his plan into action. He had learned that the guards were most likely to make mistakes when they were tired or distracted. When Guard Captain Zek Vorlin came by for the routine cell inspection, Jake was ready. "Guard Captain," Jake called out as the Zephyrian approached his cell. "I need to speak with Warden Corlith immediately." Vorlin stopped and looked at him with those large black eyes. "Prisoners do not make requests. You will speak when spoken to. This isn't a request. According to Law 2847, any being who has knowledge of legal violations must report them to the proper authorities. I have information about crimes being committed in this facility." The guard's expression didn't change, but Jake could see uncertainty in his eyes. "What crimes?" "I can only discuss this with the warden. Law 3156 states that accusations of legal violations must be reported directly to the highest authority. Present, that would be Warden Corlith." Vorlin stood there for several minutes, clearly thinking. Jake knew the guard was trying to remember the exact wording of those laws. Finally, the Zephyrian spoke into his communication device. After a brief conversation in their own language, he looked back at Jake. "The warden will see you in 1 hour. You will be escorted to his office under maximum security." Jake nodded and sat back down to wait. The first part of his plan had worked. He had used their own laws to force them to give him an audience with their leader. Now came the hard part. Not an hour later, 4 guards arrived to escort Jake through the prison corridors. He got his first look at the facility beyond his cell. The walls were the same smooth silver metal everywhere, with blue lights providing illumination. Other prisoners watched from behind transparent barriers as they passed. Most looked hopeless and broken. Warden Corliss' office was larger than Jake expected, with a big desk and several chairs. The walls were covered with what looked like law, books, and official documents. Corliss sat behind his desk, still wearing the same emotionless expression Jake remembered from their first meeting. Prisoner 7349, Corliss began. You claim to have knowledge of crimes being committed in this facility. Speak. Jake stood straight and looked directly at the warden. I accuse you of violating multiple laws of the Codex in your capture and imprisonment of me. The 4 guards immediately moved closer, their hands on their weapons. But Corliss held up one of his 4 arms to stop them. Explain your accusation. Law 4623 states that all prisoners must be informed of their specific crimes within 24 hours of capture. I have been here for over a month, and you have never told me what law I supposedly broke. Corliss' eyes narrowed slightly. You are a human. Your very existence in Zephyrian space is a violation of Border Security Law 8234. That law applies to unauthorized entry into Zephyrian territory. But my ship was in the Helios sector, which is disputed territory under the Galactic Treaty of 2387. Law 1892 of your own codex recognizes all galactic treaties as binding on Zephyrian forces. Jake could see that he had surprised the warden. Corliss quickly activated a computer terminal and began searching through legal databases. After several minutes, he looked back up. The treaty you mentioned expired 3 years ago. Did it? Law 2445 states that all treaty expirations must be announced to affected parties 90 days in advance. When did you inform the human government that you were voiding this treaty? Corliss searched his computer again. This time, it took much longer. Jake could see sweat forming on the alien's gray forehead. Finally, Corliss looked up with an expression Jake had never seen on a Zephyrian face before. Confusion. The required notification was never sent. Then, according to Law 6789, the treaty remains in effect until proper notification is given. Which means my presence in the Helios sector was legal. Which means my capture was illegal. Which means my imprisonment violates Law 9156 regarding unlawful detention. The room fell silent. Jake could hear the guards breathing heavily behind him. Warden Corliss stared at his computer screen, searching frantically through the legal databases. Every search only seemed to make things worse. Furthermore, Jake continued, Law 5623 requires that all legal challenges be investigated within 10 days. But Law 1203 states that prisoners cannot file legal challenges. These laws directly contradict each other. How do you resolve this contradiction? Corliss' hands shook as he typed. There are no contradictions in the Codex. You must be misunderstanding something. Law 7234 mandates a 15-day investigation period for any challenge to prison authority. But you just said legal challenges must be resolved in 10 days. 15 days cannot equal 10 days. This is a direct mathematical contradiction. One of the guards stepped forward. Warden, should we return the prisoner to his cell? Law 2847 requires that all beings who point out legal violations must be heard fully. Jake said quickly. You cannot return me to my cell until this legal matter is resolved. Corliss stood up abruptly, his 4 arms gesturing wildly. This is impossible. The Codex is perfect. There cannot be contradictions. Then explain to me how a being can simultaneously have the right and not have the right to file legal challenges. Explain how 10 days can equal 15 days. Explain how a treaty can be both valid and invalid at the same time. The warden sat back down heavily. Jake could see that he was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. Each contradiction, Jake pointed out led to more questions, which led to more contradictions. The perfect system was unraveling before their eyes. "What do you want?" Corliss asked quietly. "I want what Law 9156 requires for any being unlawfully detained, immediate release and full legal compensation. But first, I want legal representation as guaranteed by Law 4789. Prisoners cannot have legal representation. Law 1203 clearly states this. But Law 4789 guarantees legal representation to any being facing legal proceedings. Which law takes precedence?" Corliss looked like he might collapse. He had spent his entire life believing in the perfection of their legal system, and now a human prisoner was destroying that belief with simple logic and careful observation. "I need time to research this matter," the warden said finally. "Law 5623 gives you 10 days. Or is it 15 days, according to Law 7234? Which timeline are you going to follow?" For the first time since Jake had met him, Warden Corliss had no answer. The perfect system had encountered something it was never designed to handle, someone who actually read the laws carefully and thought about what they meant. Word of Jake's legal challenge spread through Cathara Prime faster than anyone expected. Within hours, every guard, administrator, and prisoner knew that someone had found contradictions in the sacred codex. The news created something the prison had never experienced before. Uncertainty. Jake was returned to his cell while Warden Corliss desperately searched for answers in the legal databases. But the damage was already done. Guards began questioning their daily routines, wondering if their actions violated laws they had never considered. Administrators delayed decisions, afraid of making mistakes that might expose more contradictions. "What have you done?" Dizes whispered. From the next cell that evening, "The guards are acting strange. They keep checking and rechecking their procedures." "I showed them that their perfect system isn't perfect," Jake replied. "Now they're starting to see the cracks." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 3 officials from the Zephyrian High Council arrived at the prison, their elaborate robes marking them as some of the most powerful beings in the Empire. Jake watched through his cell's transparent wall as they met with Warden Corliss in heated discussion. The meeting lasted for hours. Jake could see Corliss gesturing frantically while showing documents on his computer to the council members. Their expressions grew more troubled with each passing minute. Finally, one of the officials, a tall female with ornate markings on her gray skin, approached Jake's cell. "I am High Counselor Zara Nethys," she announced. "You are the human who claims to have found flaws in our codex." "I don't claim anything," Jake replied calmly. "I simply pointed out contradictions that already existed. The flaws were always there. You just never looked for them. The Codex has been reviewed by our greatest legal minds for 5 centuries. How could a primitive human find problems that escaped their notice?" Jake stood up and faced her directly. "Because your legal minds were looking for perfection, not problems. When you believe something is perfect, you stop questioning it. When you stop questioning, you stop learning." High Counselor Nethys activated a portable computer and began reading. "Warden Corliss has documented 17 separate contradictions you have identified. Our legal experts are analyzing them now." 17 is just the beginning, Jake said. "I've found over 200 contradictions so far, and I've only studied a small portion of your codex. The deeper you look, the more problems you'll find." The High Counselor's eyes widened. 200? That's impossible. Your Law 3456 requires all citizens to report crimes immediately. But Law 7891 forbids citizens from leaving their assigned work areas during duty hours. What happens when someone sees a crime being committed during work hours? Do they report it immediately and violate the work law? Or do they wait until after work and violate the reporting law? Nethys typed furiously on her computer. After several minutes, she looked up with an expression of growing horror. This contradiction affects millions of citizens every day. That's just one example. Your Law 5234 requires government officials to make decisions based on complete information. But Law 8567 classifies most government information as secret and forbids sharing it between departments. How can officials make informed decisions without access to information? By now, all three high counselors were frantically searching their legal databases. Each search revealed new problems, new contradictions, new impossible situations that their perfect system had created. Jake watched as centuries of absolute certainty crumbled in real time. "Why are you doing this?" demanded High Counselor Rexus Vorth, the oldest of the three officials. "What do you gain by destroying our legal system?" "I'm not destroying anything," Jake replied. "I'm just showing you what was already broken. You can't fix problems you refuse to acknowledge." "But if the Codex is flawed, then our entire civilization is built on lies," whispered High Counselor Thymus Kelm, the youngest of the group. "Not lies," Jake corrected. "Mistakes. Every intelligent species makes mistakes. The difference between wisdom and foolishness is what you do when you discover those mistakes." The three officials huddled together in urgent discussion. Jake could hear fragments of their conversation, words like crisis, collapse, and revolution. They were beginning to understand that this was bigger than just a prison problem. "Human," High Counselor Nethys said finally, "if we were to hypothetically consider that the Codex might need ... adjustments, how would such a process work?" Jake smiled. This was the opening he had been waiting for. "That depends on what you want to achieve. Do you want to patch the worst problems and hope the rest holds together? Or do you want to build something better?" "What do you mean by something better?" "A legal system that can grow and change with your society. Laws that serve justice instead of tradition. A framework that encourages questions instead of punishing them." The High Counselors exchanged shocked looks. Such concepts were completely foreign to their rigid way of thinking. But Jake could see curiosity beginning to overcome their fear. "Show us," High Counselor Nethys said quietly. Over the next several hours, Jake explained concepts that humans had developed over centuries of legal evolution. He talked about appeals processes that allowed for the correction of mistakes. He described precedent systems that let laws adapt to new situations. He outlined review mechanisms that could update outdated regulations without destroying the entire framework. The Zephyrians listened with growing amazement. They had never imagined that legal systems could be designed to change and improve over time. Their entire culture was built on the idea that perfection, once achieved, needed no modification. "These ideas are revolutionary," High Counselor Vorth sighed. "If we implemented such changes, they would transform our entire society." "Change is scary," Jake agreed. "But the alternative is collapse. Your current system is like a dam with cracks in it. You can either repair the dam or wait for it to burst. But you can't ignore the cracks and hope they go away." As the officials prepared to leave, High Counselor Nethys made an announcement. That shocked everyone present, including Jake. "The High Council will convene an emergency session to address this crisis. We may need to consider the unthinkable, modifying the Codex itself." The words sent shockwaves through the prison. Modifying the Codex was the most serious crime in Zephyrian society. Now their own leaders were talking about it as a necessity. Jake settled back in his cell that evening, satisfied with the day's work. He had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of the Empire's most powerful leaders. Now he just had to wait and see how those seeds would grow. The emergency session of the Zephyrian High Council lasted 3 days and shook the Empire to its core. Jake could hear fragments of news from the guards' conversations as reports came in from across Zephyrian space. Citizens were demanding explanations. Government offices were paralyzed as officials became afraid to make any decisions. Some planets were experiencing riots as people learned that their perfect legal system was fundamentally flawed. On the fourth day, High Counselor Nethys returned to Jake's cell with a proposal that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. "The High Council has made a decision," she announced. "We are prepared to allow you to propose amendments to the Codex to resolve the contradictions you have identified." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You want me to rewrite your laws?" "Not rewrite. Amend. We need solutions to the specific contradictions you have found. In return, we will consider reducing your sentence." "What makes you think I'm qualified to fix your legal system?" "You understand something we do not," Nethys admitted reluctantly. "You see problems where we see only perfection. Perhaps that perspective is what we need." Jake pretended to consider the offer, but he had been planning for this moment since his first day in the cell. "I'll need access to the complete codex, not just the sections you've shown me. I'll need to consult with other prisoners who understand how your laws affect different parts of society. And I'll need legal protections to ensure you don't execute me if you don't like my suggestions." The High Counselor's expression showed how much this request troubled her. Giving a prisoner access to their complete legal system was unprecedented. But the alternative was watching their civilization tear itself apart. "Agreed," she said finally. "You will have full access to our legal databases and the right to interview any prisoners you choose. In return, you must provide workable solutions to the contradictions in our system." Over the following weeks, Jake immersed himself in the complete Zephyrian Codex. What he found was even worse than he had imagined. The 10,000 laws weren't just contradictory. They were layered on top of each other like geological strata, with newer laws often directly conflicting with older ones that had never been removed. He interviewed dozens of prisoners, learning how the flawed legal system had affected their lives. There was Crix Nelden, a teacher imprisoned for asking students to think critically about government policies. There was Vaya Koresh, a scientist locked up for publishing research that contradicted an official conclusion from 2 centuries earlier. Each story showed Jake another way that rigid adherence to flawed laws was destroying lives. But Jake also found allies among the prisoners. Guises proved invaluable in explaining the historical context of various laws. A former judge named Kef Valses helped Jake understand the complex relationships between different legal codes. Even some of the guards began quietly offering suggestions when they realized Jake was trying to help rather than harm their society. As Jake worked on his amendments, he realized this was his chance to do something far more important than just escaping from prison. He could help an entire civilization learn to think differently about law and justice. His first major amendment established the principle of legal precedent. Instead of treating every situation as if it had never happened before, his system would allow judges to learn from previous cases and apply that learning to new situations. This would make the legal system more consistent and fair. His Second Amendment created an appeals process. When someone was convicted of a crime, they would have the right to ask a higher court to review the decision. This would help catch mistakes and ensure that justice was actually served, not just procedures followed. The Third Amendment was the most revolutionary. Jake proposed that the Codex should be reviewed every 10 years by a committee that included citizens from all levels of society. Laws that were no longer relevant could be removed. Laws that had proven harmful could be changed. New laws could be added to address situations the original writers had never imagined. "This is madness," protested legal scholar Tan Praxis when Jake presented his first draft. "You're suggesting we treat our laws like they're imperfect, changeable things." "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Jake replied. Laws are tools created by imperfect beings to serve imperfect societies. They should be improved when we discover better ways to achieve justice. The most radical concept Jake introduced was the idea that laws should serve principles rather than the other way around. Instead of following rules blindly, citizens and officials should understand the purpose behind each law and make decisions based on achieving the best outcome for society. "You're asking us to think," observed Thizes during one of their conversations. "For 500 years, we've been taught that thinking about laws is dangerous. Now you want us to think about nothing else. Thinking is only dangerous to those who benefit from ignorance," Jake replied. "Your current system serves those in power by preventing anyone from questioning their authority. A better system would serve justice by encouraging everyone to understand and improve the laws they live under." As Jake worked on his amendments, word of his ideas spread throughout the empire. Some citizens were horrified by the suggestion that their perfect system needed changes. Others were excited by the possibility of a more just and flexible legal framework. The debates grew so intense that the High Council had to impose martial law on several planets to prevent civil wars. "You've created chaos," Warden Corlith told Jake during one of their meetings. "Our society is tearing itself apart." "Your society was already broken," Jake corrected. "I just made the damage visible. Sometimes you have to break something completely before you can rebuild it properly." After 2 months of intensive work, Jake completed his comprehensive amendments to the Zephyrian Codex. His new framework reduced the 10,000 laws to fewer than 1,000 core principles, with clear mechanisms for interpretation, appeal, and modification. It was elegant, flexible, and designed to grow with the society it served. But Jake knew that presenting his amendments was only the beginning. The real challenge would be getting the Zephyrians to accept ideas that challenged everything they believed about law and order. He was about to find out if an entire civilization could learn to embrace change instead of fearing it. The fate of the Zephyrian Empire and Jake's own freedom would depend on their answer. The full assembly of the Zephyrian High Council gathered in their ancient chamber on the capital world of Zephyr Prime to hear Jake's final presentation. Representatives from every planet in the Empire attended either in person or through holographic projection. Never before had a prisoner been allowed to address such a gathering, but these were unprecedented times. Jake stood before the assembled leaders, no longer wearing prison clothes, but a simple gray robe that marked him as a legal consultant. The irony wasn't lost on him. A few months ago, he had been labeled their most dangerous prisoner, and now they were asking for his help to save their civilization. "Honored counselors," Jake began, "you asked me to find solutions to the contradictions in your codex. What I discovered was that the contradictions weren't bugs in your system. They were features. Your legal framework was designed to be so complex and confusing that ordinary citizens couldn't understand it, which gave unlimited power to those who claimed to interpret it." Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the chamber. Several counselors stood up to object, but High Counselor Nethys gestured for silence. "Continue," she said grimly. "The good news is that your society doesn't need to collapse. You just need to remember something you forgot 500 years ago. The laws exist to serve people, not the other way around." Jake activated a holographic display showing his proposed amendments. "My framework reduces your 10,000 laws to 1,000 core principles organized around 3 simple concepts: fairness, flexibility, and accountability." Jake spent the next 3 hours explaining each section of his amendments. He showed how the appeals process would prevent innocent people from being imprisoned for crimes they didn't commit. He demonstrated how regular reviews would keep laws relevant to changing circumstances. He outlined how legal precedents would make the system more predictable and fair. The questions came fast and sharp. Counselor Vorth demanded to know how society could function if people were allowed to question laws. Counselor Kelm worried that flexibility would lead to chaos. Others feared that changing their ancient system would anger their ancestors and bring cosmic punishment. Jake answered each concern with patience and logic. He explained that questioning bad laws was patriotic, not treasonous. He showed how flexibility actually created more stability by allowing peaceful change instead of violent revolution. He pointed out that their ancestors would probably be proud to see their descendants improving upon their work. But the real test came when Councillor Rexenthaldus, the oldest and most conservative member of the council, stood up with a challenge. "Human," Thaldus said with barely contained anger, "you ask us to abandon 5 centuries of tradition based on the theories of an alien prisoner. Why should we trust you over our own ancestors?" Jake had been expecting this question. "Because I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust yourselves. Every amendment I've proposed can be tested on a small scale before being implemented empire-wide. Try the appeals process in one court system and see if it produces better justice. Test the review mechanism on one planet and see if it improves their laws. You don't have to change everything at once." This practical approach seemed to reassure many of the counselors. They could experiment with change without risking everything on untested theories. Over the following days, the debate continued as legal experts examined every detail of Jake's proposals. The breakthrough came when Dizes was brought before the council to testify about his own case. The former farming administrator explained how the rigid legal system had prevented him from doing his job effectively, leading to crop failures that could have been avoided with more flexible regulations. The humans' amendments would have allowed Emmy to update our farming laws based on new soil conditions, Dizes said quietly. Thousands of people went hungry because our legal system valued tradition over practical solutions. His testimony was followed by dozens of other prisoners who told similar stories. Scientists prevented from sharing important discoveries, teachers forbidden from using effective methods, doctors unable to treat patients because medical laws hadn't been updated in centuries. Each story showed the human cost of legal inflexibility. Finally, High Counselor Nethys called for the historic vote. The chamber fell silent as each counselor made their decision. Jake watched as green lights appeared one by one on the voting display. When the final tally appeared, the amendments had passed by a margin of 73%. "The amendments to the Codex are hereby approved," Nethys announced. "Implementation will begin immediately on 3 test worlds, with full empire-wide adoption to follow within 1 year if the results prove successful." But Jake wasn't done yet. As the counselors prepared to leave, he made one final request. According to the new Amendment 7, any being imprisoned under laws that have been found to be contradictory or unjust has the right to immediate release and full legal compensation. I formally request my freedom under this provision. The chamber buzzed with discussion. Technically, Jake was right. His imprisonment had been based on contradictory laws that were now being eliminated. But releasing him would mean admitting that their perfect system had wrongly imprisoned an innocent being. High Counselor Nethys looked around the chamber, reading the expressions of her colleagues. Finally, she nodded. "The request is granted. Jake Morrison, you are hereby released from custody with full pardons for any alleged violations of imperial law. Furthermore, the Council recognizes your service to the Empire and grants you the status of honorary legal advisor." Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. After months of imprisonment, he was finally free. But more importantly, he had helped an entire civilization take its first steps toward a more just and flexible future. As he prepared to leave Cathara Prime, Jake was approached by Dizes and dozens of other former prisoners who had been released under the new amendments. They thanked him for showing them that even the most rigid systems could be changed by people willing to think critically and act courageously. "What will you do now?" Dizes asked as they walked toward the transport that would take Jake back to human space. "Go home, I suppose. Report to my superiors about what happened to the Terra Nova. Try to prevent future conflicts between our peoples. The Empire will be very different by the time you return," Dizes observed. "The changes you started will reshape our entire civilization." Jake smiled as he looked back at the prison that had held him for so many months. That was the idea. Sometimes the best way to escape from a cage is to teach everyone else how to open the door. The transport lifted off, carrying Jake away from Zephyr Prime and toward human space. Behind him, he left a civilization that was learning to question its assumptions, challenge its traditions, and build a better future. The Zephyrian Empire would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed. Jake Morrison had entered their prison as a captured enemy, but he was leaving as the architect of their legal revolution. He had proven that human ingenuity and determination could overcome any obstacle, even laws written in stone by ancient civilizations. It was a victory that would be remembered long after the last star burned out.